Okay, so Great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yadira Martinez. I am the CCC coordinator, and we will get started at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, feel free to go ahead and interact in the chat box, in the comment box. Please be respectful, and we'll get started at 3 o'clock.
Comenzaremos en unos minutos. Buenas tardes.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, hello everyone. My name is Yadira Martinez. I am the CCC coordinator. Thank you for joining us on Facebook Live, or if you're joining us on Zoom, welcome. We do have interpretation available. Our interpreter for today is going to be Sonia Romo from the CCC. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see an icon that says interpretation. You're able to hear this in either Spanish or English if you're on the Zoom call. So buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por estar aquí. Sí tenemos interpretación disponible. Abajo de su pantalla pueden elegir español o inglés y pueden escuchar todo en su idioma si está en la llamada en Zoom. Si están en Facebook Live, van a tener que entrar en el Zoom para escuchar la interpretación. Entonces, ahorita le presento a Irene de Cícero Independiente.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this panel. I am so excited to get started. I'm going to just remind everybody to please speak slowly for the interpretation. And for people that want to send the panelists any questions, you can either put them in our Facebook Live that's going on. We're going to be monitoring the comments. Or if you're on the Zoom, you can also send them to me, Irene, on the Zoom chat. You can send them to everybody, but if you prefer to, keep it private, you can just send them to me. And yes, and as one of our panelists said, no question is taboo, just do not be disrespectful. So I am very excited again for this panel. Just want to remind everyone, just to set the stage, right? Like queer, especially trans people of color have always and forever paved the way in creating spaces of radical organizing and liberation, not just in Cicero, but everywhere. Today, we're going to be learning about the rich history of queer and trans-led organizing here in Cicero and here from Carari, Olvera, from Emmanuel, from Reina, and from Jorge, who is going to be moderating the panel. This is a lot of history that isn't often acknowledged or taught, and it is really our duty to learn, honor, and continue the work of pushing for a community of radical acceptance and care. At the end, we are going to share some resources and some more information about organizations that you can support today and some of the work that we've been doing at Cicero Independiente. And I also forgot to introduce that this panel is organized by Cicero Independiente. We're a bilingual newspaper here in Cicero. We'll share more information too. So to get us started, I'm gonna introduce Jorge Martinez. Jorge is a current high school student from Cicero, who was the president of Unity's Gay Straight Student Alliance. He pushed the administration to include inclusive history in the curriculum and sex education. The group that he was a part of did a bunch of work and also screened a movie about gay teenagers who fall in love, held workshops about gender pronouns, and petitioned the administration to respond to incidents of bullying with restorative justice. So Jorge, I give you the mic for you to help us moderate this panel today. Again, just quick reminder, send us questions in the chat. If you are in Zoom, you can leave them in comments on our Facebook. And otro recordatorio que también tenemos interpretación al español. Si están en Facebook y quieren escuchar la interpretación, por favor, únanse al Zoom. Vamos a poner el enlace en los comentarios. Y en el Zoom, para acceder a la interpretación, es el botón de abajo que tiene un mundo y dice interpretación. Ahí van a poder escoger español. Muchas gracias y comenzamos.
Thank you so much, Irene, and thank you so much for all the amazing guest speakers who are here with us. I am so very honored to be here with everyone today and to be sharing this virtual space, no matter how much the distance in between us. My name is Jorge. My pronouns are he and elle. I work very closely with Cicero Independiente to try to bring those queer and youth voices to the table. But my role for today and for this discussion will be to moderate. And I want to hear everything about these amazing speakers, amazing activists. And so without further ado, let's get started. I'll ask our guest speakers if they can introduce themselves, your pronouns, and let's spice it up. What song have you guys been listening to lately?
Who wants to go first?
You.
Okay, well, my name is Caradio Olvera. I am a proud Cicero resident. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them, ella, ella. Currently, the song that I've been listening to on repeat is Drew Barrymore by Bryce Vine.
Who wants to go next?
Emmanuel.
My name is Emmanuel Garcia and my pronouns are he, they. I'm listening to, right before this, I was listening to Beyonce's Break My Soul. So that is what I'm listening to.
Thank you for having me. My name is Reina Ortiz, she, her pronouns. The song that I've been listening to in the last couple of days, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Under the Bridge. It's just a dope ass song. I love it.
I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't know any of the songs. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for everyone joining us today. And I have a list of questions prepared, but I want this to be more of a conversation. And so please feel free to jump in at any moment. And we want to hear from you. And so my first question that I have for our amazing speakers today is, I want to hear what it was like growing up queer in Cicero. I know this may be a broad question, but I'm sure it's at the front of our mind in this day and age. And so I want to hear, does anyone feel comfortable getting started or?
Who wants to go first? We're all very modest people.
You're right now.
I'll go first. How did I feel? Well, I came out, I'm gonna age myself down, but it's okay though, because it's all documented. I'm an old queen. 42. Next year will be my 30th anniversary of coming out to my family in Cicero. How did I feel growing up queer or, fluid? I think it really set the tone of like what it was going to be like, just kind of navigating through queerness or transness in the society anywhere that I went. There was support and there wasn't support, and it was like this balance. But I feel, Cicero gave me the foundation of what was needed in order to, just grow as a person.
I think like Reina says, right? It's like Cicero, it has its ups and downs, and it still has its ups and downs. And I know for me, I am 38, so like I didn't come out as queer until maybe like when I was 20. I didn't come out as trans until like 7 years ago, so until I was 30. So it's just like I didn't really like. I mean, of course I grew up queer, right? Because everybody saw it, everybody told me, everybody like reminded me that I was queer, even before I even knew that I was queer. Everybody asked me why I spoke like a girl, even before I was a girl. So it's just kind of like growing up in Cicero was just this living, like this fluid existence that people acknowledge without really directly speaking it. And I don't know if that's how it like the other panelists felt, but I know for me, like my brother all the time when he was like walking to school, like gangs would check him and be like, oh, you know, what are you? I didn't have that experience. It's like, it's almost like they already knew that they didn't want me on their team. And so they were just like avoiding me altogether. And I never had that like experience that a lot of other like people who grew up as boys experience, right? So I think that's for me, that's how I always imagined like my sister experience was just like this existence of being perceived by all, but yet still very invisible.
Mm-hmm. I think of my experience in Cicero as like externally more later on in life, like when I was in high school. I grew up very sheltered. My family was like apostolic, and so I went to like a private school outside in the city in Chicago. So none of my friends growing up were from Cicero. Like I didn't have any connections with people in the community. So I feel like I grew up really sheltered from community in Cicero, from like that like school environment. By the time I got to high school, which was the first time I got introduced to people that were living in Cicero, like people my age, was my sophomore year in high school. So that was like super late. Everybody knew each other. Everybody had gone to the same grammar school. But that's actually where everything actually, I found my supportive environment as a gay queer person. So I think that when I reflect back on like my experience growing up in Cicero, I think of my family, my immediate family experience, and not necessarily having the support of my family in coming out. You know, I had like a kind of negative experience in coming out. Like my family always knew that I was different and everyone kind of signaled that, but no one ever like stopped to provide support and what that meant. So I had to kind of, I think like most queer people, figure it out on my own, if you will, and kind of like reach out to resources outside of my family's home. So I do remember like going to the Cicero Public Library and like looking up like the word gay on the computer and like looking up books and trying to find resources where I could learn like, what does it mean to be gay? So yeah, so that's how I feel like I was able to kind of navigate growing up in Cicero.
And that echo of feeling invisible, Cara, you were mentioning, and kind of having our own chosen family kind of mentality is so very prevalent in all of the queer community. And I wanted to ask, how did it feel when you finally felt seen? Like, how did you have to make your own space? Did you have to actively seek it out? Was there a mentor? And what were the challenges that you faced in coming to that, you know, internally, socially? I know, starting off right off the bat, but I don't know if anyone wants to go first or.
I think that when you are growing up, right, and you are experiencing the world many times for the first time, like being bullied, being people talking about you, I think you end up kind of creating, not necessarily, yeah, like you're creating community, but you're also creating this buffer, right? And so I always like tell, like when people ask me like, what was it like growing up as queer and being effeminate and being very visibly queer without really knowing what that meant. I always say how I was friends with all the girls, and because I was friends with all the girls, the boys couldn't bother me because otherwise the girls would stop talking to them. And so it was just this kind of like protective bubble that just being friends with the girls and also like, you know, being considered one of the smart ones, right, in Cicero. So I was put in honors classes and all that. So like I was tracked into being, you know, one of the exceptions in Cicero very early on. It also kind of helped me because then these boys who are definitely cute and definitely the ones that I was, you know, going after, because honestly, that is still my type. Cicero boys are still my type, 90s sister boys, there's definitely that vibe. It still does something to me spiritually, but like, so it's like all those things just kind of like protected me in a way where I almost was unaware of it. It was almost, and there's this thing in like the trans community that we talk about the egg, right? The trans women hatch their egg. And it was essentially that. I think that my egg was just so protected that I just didn't have to hatch for so long. It was just like buffered by all these people who were just like, yeah, Danny is a little soft, but we don't talk about it. We don't ask questions. We just let it exist. And so, yeah, like it just, that's kind of how it felt for me. It's just this buffer that existed. And then we essentially create that buffer. We cultivate that buffer, and certain people we allow into that buffer, but other people we also don't. So I think it's just like this universal thing, I guess. I don't know if I answered the question, but that was mine.
No, definitely. And I think that's so very, I feel that, and I see it reflected in our community all the time. Manuel or Reina, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
So I think like karate, when you are trans femme or a femme, being friends with the girls is a survival mechanism. It really is, and that's at Morenese High School in 1994 when I was 14, and it was in every crevice of my femininity really just exude out of me, and there was just no way to contain it. So there was no kind of hiding. I was super out, super, androgynous teenager. So I, like karate, made friends with all the girls right away. I said, oh God, where's the beauties at? My internet might be acting crazy, but anyways, okay, I made friends with other girls, and karate is real correct, where the boys learned if you were gonna get something.
Oh.
She was about to say something spicy, that's why.
You couldn't
jinx that.
Hey, Reina, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I know my computer froze, but we're good.
Yeah, did you want to repeat the last part of your sentence? You cut out a little bit.
If you wanted to get some play, you could not mess with Reina Ortiz. That was it,
I second that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that I think the first time that I felt seen was at really getting introduced to the Morenese Gay and Straight Alliance. That was the first time for me that I felt like, oh, I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only person navigating this. There were other, queer people that existed within the school and that I could get involved in. It was like the first time that I felt like I started to begin to understand like queer community and like building that chosen family and what that all meant. So just super grateful, because I feel like that for me set the tone for everything else after that. Whether it was challenging to be at home or outside, I felt a lot of support in that space after school.
Yeah, Megasa, I remember, I think it was sophomore year when I did the Megasa like vow of silence during the day of silence during the day. And I remember my cousin's husband was like, why are you wearing that? It's like, they're sinful. And I remember that like forced me, like, I think I probably would have come out sooner if I would have like not received that feedback when I was like 16 years old from someone who I like looked up to. And yeah, Megasa, I feel like was a much needed space for a lot of people as they were exploring their identities, particularly in high school. Because in grade school, we couldn't even imagine being out as queer, trans in middle school or grade school, but definitely in high school. It's like I remember just wanting to, but not wanting to, and then wanting to, but not. So it was just this kind of dance that I did all through high school that, I eventually stopped dancing until I was in college.
Yeah, there's definitely this ambiguity, right, of who I can be out with and who I can't be, who can I be safe with, when do I code switch, and it's felt through every ripple of the community. And on that topic, I wanted to ask, when was a moment that you felt kind of sprang you to action, that you decided to fight transphobia, you decided to fight homophobia, you decided to fight hate, that you were that you've all shared as part of a little bit of your experience. When did you decide to be, I'm gonna say,
I'll just say it happened when I told my mother. I told her, and I was very young, and she gave me the permission and the courage to say, no, baby, you're not wrong, and this is not bad, but you have to battle, and everyone around you is not going to understand that. But you know, it was like she was giving me the permission to say, I love you, your family loves you, and everyone else around you is going to have to adjust. And at 13, 14 years old, that gave me the strength to say, well, you know what, my mother loves me, my family loves me, and everyone around me is irrelevant, and how they feel about me is irrelevant. And that gave me the drive because I felt protected at home. So that's when I was very young, very, very young, and very trans into spirit. And I had no other choice but to battle, you know, but it's family support is huge, you know, when your family gives you that, if you're lucky enough to get it, you know, it gives you that jumping point to come out and say, well, my mama loves me, so everyone else is irrelevant.
thank you, Raina.
I would say, like, for me, growing up in Cicero really kind of set a precedent, because, you know, as many children of immigrant parents, I was already an advocate and I was already an interpreter for my parents. I was already like the person who was speaking out for my parents. I was the oldest of three. And so from a very young age, I was expected to take care of my siblings. I was expected to be the person to help my family. And I think that kind of trained me to think that, like, it was just kind of my duty to be like the person who is supposed to make things happen, who's supposed to be the one who talks, and they're supposed to be the one who asks the, you know, the clerk for the receipt, or that they overcharged us, all those things. It just kind of became a part of my own understanding that when I finally came out, you know, when I was in college, it only made sense for me to kind of be pushing for visibility. And also this lined up around the same time when the first immigration marches started like happening, with like the Rainbow Riders organizing, with all the, what was that, in 2012, I believe? What years was that? I can't remember. No, it was before that. It was probably 2010-ish. I don't know, time goes by so fast, I can't remember. But it's just like, it all just kind of lined up around that time when there's so much stuff happening. I was young, I was in my 20s, I had already experienced being an advocate, that it just made sense. It just kind of clicked. And I kind of haven't stopped doing it. And it could just be that I like attention, I like being set the center of attention. Or, you know, it could actually be that it's just something in my DNA that feels like I need to do this. And if I don't do this, somehow I'll like wither and die. And I feel like this has kept me like, not necessarily young, because it's kind of ageist, but it's kept me alive, right? This idea that I am able to transform the world around me is this powerful thing. And I think you, Jorge, have probably experienced the same things. Like once you realize that, oh, my voice can actually transform things around me, it completely changes young people. It completely changes your own perspective of life.
Yes, our voices have the power to transform. Snaps to that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I, from the personal, right, to the more structural, you know, for me, when I was 8 years old, which was when we moved to Cicero, we got broken into, our house got broken into, and they didn't rob us. They like basically vandalized everything. The whole place was upside down. So I remember coming back from church with my parents, and we're like, did someone leave the door open? And no. And someone had basically come in and vandalized the whole house. And in my bedroom that I shared with my brother with red graffiti, they wrote the word Spix. And I remember asking the cops, like when they came to make the police report, like, what does that mean? And it was like, oh, this is like a, you know, derogatory term that they use for Mexicans. And so it turned out that it was like our neo-Nazi neighbor. There was a lot of racism at the time with more Latino families moving into the neighborhood. So for me personally, like I experienced that sort of like knowing that we were different, and that that people hated us for a very particular reason. And then when I get to high school and I'm able to like make friends and be in queer spaces, like to have us, you know, have a day of silence, a more organized kind of action that sort of helped me train me to think about how can I make the most impact with my community, you know? And so I was able to kind of channel that personal experience and experiences of injustice and think that I could actually play a role in changing that. So as a queer person, you know, obviously the kind of the irony is that then my family wasn't accepting of me being different, even though they experienced their own kind of like racism on their own. But yeah, that's, for me, that's kind of where I sort of make that connection.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories, everyone. I know you're all champions for the LGBTQ plus community. And so I want to ask a question that very recently a teacher posed on me. And I want to ask, what does it mean to be an advocate for you? I know everyone defines it a little bit differently, but can you tell us a little bit more about your organizing experience? What motivates you? What drives you as a champion? And how you want us to move forward and how you see us moving forward?
I'll go first. For an advocate is people find their voice. You know, that's how I see it. No shade. You know, some people, it's harder for them to manifest and verbalize things, you know, and if you take on the commitment of an advocate for whoever you are advocating for, is you are assisting them in finding the voice of defending themselves, of protecting themselves and representing themselves, you know. So that's just how I see it. And now, you know, working very intensely with trans youth, censoring trans youth, you know, I give them that, you know, as an elder of trans people. I want to help them find their voice and also to use the voice to be beneficial to themselves and their community.
Thank you, Reina. Manuela, Curry, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just don't. I think, yeah, I think the word that comes to mind for me is empowerment. You know, I feel like once I empower myself in different areas of my life where I may feel like, you know, I'm not in control or I don't have any power to make changes. Once I get that empowerment, I know how powerful it is. Like, you're unstoppable at that point. And so for me, like, organizing work is really to inspire other people to be empowered and to find that that power within themselves to make those changes. I think one of the things that I got told from immigrant rights organizers was around like, no, you're not advocating for the voiceless. You know, everyone has a voice. You know, you just have to pass the mic, you know, and share that platform. If you have an opportunity to share your platform with someone else that maybe doesn't have that same privilege or access or power, then that's your moment to support that to happen, that type of empowerment. So that I see that a lot in the way that I try and attempt to do the work. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I think our job as advocates is not to be always talking. And sometimes I've really been, like, most of my activism has been around creating spaces where people can share their conversations. So it's like, I love moderating panels. I love facilitating like workshops. Those are things that I love doing because it allows people to talk. And I think talking with each other, sharing stories is really what is transformative. And so for me, that's the job of an advocate, is to create these spaces. Because yeah, like, I'm used to yelling loudly, but there's people out there who are still working on that whisper, you know, and you still have to be able to shut people up so that people can hear that whisper. And so then they get stronger, and then they're able to yell or scream or however they want to, like, you know, do it. But as I think, you know, because not everybody needs to be an advocate, not everybody needs to be like front and center or telling everybody that they're trans. We're just creating spaces where people can just exist as trans and just be trans without it being like this kind of big weight. And so, like, yeah, that for me, that's what it is. It's like, you are cultivating spaces for that conversation to happen in the first place. And I think I'm indebted to the people who have shown me that, who I've watched, both Emmanuel and Reina have been doing so much work. And it's like, and Reina, I know oftentimes you talk about how you started with the Raices project, but really you made spaces for the girls before that. You were being an advocate for the girls even before it was like, it was cool to be an advocate for the girls. So I'm indebted to people like Reina.
Thank you. You're all amazing advocates and activists, and I want to get a better picture of your activism. I want to get a picture of you as an organizer. Can you share with us, what previous organizing you've done, that you continue to do or plan to do in our community?
So for a long time, like in my early 20s, I worked for the Boys Club of Cicero, which is, like sketch that it's still gender segregated, and actually they just opened a co-ed program. But I mean, I love Edgar, who's the executive director, and I'm not trying to be shady with him, but also like, come on, y'all. And so it's just I worked there, creating spaces with youth. And that's where I met a few of my children who were members of the Boys Club at the time. And it was always a challenge to make spaces for, queer youth who obviously were not interested in just playing basketball all day with all these other boys. They wanted to do other stuff, but because of just the dynamics, it required me to constantly be pushing and advocating for them. And be like, no, we should do this stuff, and and so I think that's kind of where a lot of my queer activism began, was just because, okay, I'm queer and I see these kids, I see myself in some of these youth, and I'm just like, okay, I want you to bloom quicker than I did, because there was not enough sun in my life, and so I want you to feel that there is sun and that you're able to be you. After that, I started working with United Latino Pride, which is now United Latinx Pride, which will probably be changing again because, of course, language is constantly evolving. But it's just I did a lot of organizing with ULP over the years, organizing week-long celebrations of LGBTQ Latinx Pride. Emmanuel was was also a fellow organizer. Reina was also, I think you were on one of the panels that we had for ULP Week. So it's a lot of it has been that, again, the creating of spaces, creating these moments, creating these events. And then now I'm mostly focusing on the Trans Latina Coalition, which is a national-wide organization. I'm on the board for them. And I'm also doing actual workshop facilitation and creating panels under Praxis Group, which is a consulting business here in Chicago. And so I think I've been able to, thankfully, turn my activism to something that allows me to live, because I don't want to depend on any organization to feed me. Yes. I've been able to essentially feed myself through my performances, panels, all that good stuff. So that's kind of just a little bit of what I have done. I feel that I forget a lot of it, but I know that we've done a lot in Cicero and outside of it. And there's, people in the chat right now, there's Pedro there, who's also was part of the ULP organizing. There is Kim Ramirez Mercado, who was also part of the organizing. So there's people in the chat who are there, who are also not on this the Zoom walls, because it's not just me, it's not just Emmanuel, it's not just Reina. It takes a whole village to make these things happen. It takes a whole community to move us into action.
Reina, did you want to share?
Well, activism and advocacy looks different to everyone. Everybody has different capacities of what activism is and advocacy is. And we have to kind of, what it works for us. And being in the streets is great. It's great to be with people that are like-minded. It's great, but also for me, activism is going up against these systems that are systematically transphobic and make things ugly and bureaucratic for the people that are trying to navigate through them. So for me, activism, yes, I'll go into the streets, but also it's really, understanding the degrees of bureaucracy that impact our people, regardless if they're trans or not, and then also like addressing them and then attacking them, canceling them, and you know, changing them. That to me is the strongest form for me of activism.
Yes, I'm thinking about the bricks, the throwing the bricks.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm thinking about is just like what a beautiful connection, right? Like even after years, like knowing Karari and Reina for so long and being connected to different work that we've all just been a part of. And want to uplift what Karari is talking about, which is that none of us do this work alone, and that we've had so many people who are leading that work, have led that work, co-led that work, were with us, and we're just getting to kind of represent that work. And I guess very specific to Cicero, I just want to say that, you know, starting in like 1997, being part of Morning East Gay Straight Alliance, that was for me my introduction. And so then to, you know, 16 years later, to be able to go back and start this project called Raíces, which was addressing, you know, homophobia and transphobia within the community of Little Village and Cicero, and being able to like partner up with Reina, you know, years later as being someone who I looked up to when I was in high school, when I was part of Megasa and all of that. And now, you know, 10 years later, after doing the Raíces work, which we did in, you know, 2012, you know, that was like 10 years ago, you know, to be able to co-direct a documentary that highlights, you know, the experiences of trans and gay people in the pandemic. And Reina's one of the key stories there. To me, those things would not happen if we weren't like in relationship with one another and like continuing that community together. And so I'm just really proud that, you know, in the span of like 26 years, the three of us, I think, have been able to just be in community with one another and know that we can call on each other if we need something. And so I think that for me, organizing is community building and building community with one another, and no one's disposable. We all have different things that we bring to the table. And, you know, just the people that make the tamales for the meeting are just as important as the people facilitating the meeting. And so for me, it's all of that. So, yeah.
Yes, just the thought of tamales makes me hungry. Thank you so much for sharing about all of your activism. Amazing, and it's such an honest inspiration to me and to I hope everyone. But I want to ask, you know, why is it that not many people know about this kind of work, your work in specific, and our history, our queer history in Cicero? You know, why do we need, why are we here is my question. Why do we need to have these spaces? Why do we need to have these discussions? Why can't people just already know?
I mean, in like one short word, right? It's like homophobia, transphobia is the reason why we don't know these stories, right? It's like, I only knew about Reina because I saw her in, you know, my yearbook in 1998. You know, she was the prom queen, and I remember seeing her, but she was never mentioned ever again in any of the yearbooks after that. No, like, unless you knew Reina and unless you were impacted by that light, you didn't really speak about it. And the same thing that happens with a lot of these projects, that like, unless you were directly impacted by these projects, by these endeavors, by these like movements that we create, oftentimes it just kind of wither and vanish because transphobia, homophobia, it's easier for us to see it as not really part of history. And also, like, the administration in Cicero has not always been very friendly towards queer and trans people. I know recently I'm part of this. I like to fight on Facebook, and one of the groups I like to fight in is the Cicero community page. And so somebody posted how they approached Larry Dominic, our current president here in Cicero, why they didn't do anything for Pride. And he said, it's not for him, right? And it's like, well, it's just not, they just don't want it, right? It's like, it's not a thing for him. And I think that's just the kind of the reality, is that oftentimes we aren't, our contributions to this community, to this town, are often overlooked because it's seen as something that's like not important, right? More than likely it's because it's not politically viable, right? They also did not fly the flag and the Mexican flag in Cicero until we were like the vast majority, and then suddenly like, oh yeah, let's do a parade for them too, despite the fact that the government in Cicero is still predominantly white in a town that is like 90% like Latin American descent. So it's like there's those structural things that prevent us from really connecting the dots right after each other. And so I think a lot of times we have to do that. We have to do the pullback. I have to always like, anytime I'm talking, I have to be like, well, I wasn't here first. Like these people were here before me. Let me pull them back over here so that y'all are aware that I didn't invent the wheel. The wheel was invented a long time ago. Somebody just like passed it over to me. So yeah.
I would just piggyback off what Karari was saying. You know, we lost it in our culture. We lost it. Ideally, we lost it to Eurocentric ideology. We lost that. Why is our government in Cicero majority white and the people are, you know, brown and indigenous people? You know, we lost that in our culture because prior to that, we were celebrated. And I talk about it all the time because it's important, because we lost it. Why do we have to continuously battle for our identities as gender variant people? It's because it was stolen from us and buried and hidden in our culture, has lost that component to it and has assimilated into Eurocentric mindset. And this is the consequence of it, and it's been the consequence of it until our people realize that the binary is made up just like a lot of things in this country, and that there is multiple gender identities prior to colonization. These are still the ramifications of it, and we have to learn it. Our people have to understand it, and we have to dismantle that. And until we don't, or until we do, we were still going to have these same systematic Eurocentric cultural battles.
I just want to add, sorry, excuse me, that I would gladly start someone should start the petition for, you know, Reina to be, you know, named after somewhere, a room at, you know, Maureen's Gay Straight Alliance to be named in her honor so that that history is preserved, things like that, you know. But I will also just add that yes, Karari's right, it is structural, and, you know, Cicero has more problems, not just homophobia, you know, the anti-Blackness that we saw during the uprisings, you know, was a huge thing. And it shows just like this divide, you know, within our own Latino communities of how much we need to decolonize ourselves. And I think that Cicero is one of those like unique places where people left the city, you know, because they sort of wanted to like assimilate into this suburban neighborhood, away from like the Black community in Chicago and away from like, you know, gangs and so and whatever, you know. And so I feel like all of that we see that, you know, and it also plays out in the transphobia and the homophobia in the community. Now, to Cicero's credit, I will also say that when we were doing the work in surveying the community, businesses and organizations, institutions like Corazon and the Cicero Public Library, those were the safe places in our community. You know, those were the places where people felt seen and heard. And one of the things that came out of a survey that we did in the community was that everybody knew someone who was LGBT. Everyone had a family member, everyone had a cousin, a brother, a sister, everyone had someone who was LGBT. The one thing that people didn't have was the resources or the education around how to talk about these issues. And the one issue that they really, really wanted to learn more about 10 years ago was gender and trans issues. That's the one thing that young people, older people in the community, they just didn't have the language. They didn't understand it, but they wanted to learn. They wanted more workshops on that. So I feel like this idea that the community is more homophobic or transphobic is inaccurate. It's just the system, the systemic, you know, problems that Cicero has, which is the lack of education with LGBT issues, or the lack of sharing that history and that information, you know. But I want to uplift that, like the Cicero Public Library, for being a huge resource, you know, to our community in general.
I also just wanted to give us like a fun fact. There is actually a park named after a gay person in Cicero. Andy Lopez Park was named after, eventually Andy Lopez came out as gay, but it's sad that in order for there to be something named after a gay person, the person had to be shot, because Andy was shot, and that's why there was like this activism around like safe spaces and creating parks and greens. And so there is actually like that park, and I think there isn't that knowledge behind it. There isn't that information behind it. Like Mano says, we don't have the enough resources to really connect the dots.
Thank you for sharing that, Karari, and thank you all for sharing. I know we talked a lot about the issues that our community faces, that our town of Cicero faces, everything from government, systemic changes, lack of education. And this leads me to a question from the audience. It's, what policy changes do we need to fight for in Cicero? I know we've heard a lot here and there, but I think we'd love to hear what suggestions that you folks have.
As someone who is living here currently, I think like absolutely there's like this taxes are going up, like Emmanuel says, like families are being pushed out. Gentrification was starting to happen right before like the housing bubble in Cicero, and then the housing bubble popped, and suddenly a lot of these homes became like subsidized income houses. But now it's like you can just feel that they're kind of going back to that kind of momentum of like, oh, this Cicero is this ideal place, kind of like how Berwyn is also doing it, you know, feeding this like myth of like a refuge outside of the city. And so I think policy-wise, more importantly, I think we need to get rid of the entire like administration that we currently have, honestly. And it's very, very difficult because there is a machine that's behind it, right? It's very difficult for any, you know, person of Latin American descent to really be like, yes, I want to step up to the plate, because oftentimes those people have already been co-opted by this machine in order to do so. And so I don't know what the answer is and how to do it. All I know is that it needs to happen, because we see that, you know, we're very policed. Like if you go down Cicero, anytime school is out, what do you see? Nothing but cops and those task force cop vehicles, right? That's all you see along these streets. It's like, well, then where are these programs for the young people to be at after school? Where's the programs for like anybody to have connections to? It's like, why is it that we have more money in order to pay for like the cops to just sit there as like students are coming out? It's just, it's mind-boggling to me. And I think that there's just so much that Cicero needs to do. There's so much that needs to be addressed, that because, you know, I don't know, there's just some complacency, I guess, that we have to like really kind of like fight against. But also this real exhaustion, because this is a working class community, and a lot of times people are just exhausted and they don't have the capacity to be involved in politics or go vote. Like I have to constantly remind my family to go vote. And oftentimes it's like, let's go. It's almost closing time. I know you're tired, Dad, but we gotta go. Let's go. So yeah, like at least that's how I feel as someone who's living here, who's lived here a long time, because there is so much room for growth in Cicero. And I love Cicero as the place like that I grew up with. But I also, it's like, you kind of almost learn to just like hate Cicero, because you're like, Jesus Christ, come on. Like, why are we like this? And it's just, yeah.
Thank you.
I think Reina dipped on this question. Just kidding. No, we lost it. She'll come back. I think I don't want to speak for people living in Cicero, like what's the best thing that needs to happen in terms of policy in Cicero. But I think that obviously because it's in Illinois, it's part of the whole state, and all of the, you know, protections that everyone gets citywide are granted to people who live in Cicero. I think what's unique about Cicero is that it's its own town, right? So like Chicago has its own mayor. We allocate resources differently than what Cicero gets to do with their resources. But I think the problems are the same, as Karari mentioned, you know, like defunding the police and moving those resources somewhere else. Cicero is one of the highest tax areas in Illinois. Like why is it that a working class, you know, predominantly Mexican immigrant community is being taxed at a higher level, you know? And so I think it's just, and I don't necessarily know that things are better, you know, in the access that people have for their home. I know like the water bill is, higher in Cicero than it is in Chicago, for example. And it's not like, you know, that flooding that happened in Cicero, which was a nightmare for people. And then, so I think there are a couple things, but yeah, that's what I'll say around that.
Let me interject really quickly. I think Reina is back. Okay, great.
Is Reina back on the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry. The question that was asked in the chat was about policy changes. Reina, I don't know if you want to have some time to answer it. No. Okay, we can move on. Thank you so much for your thoughtful responses to how we can move forward and with these policy changes. There's some more questions from the chat. Thank you all to our audience for sending questions. These are awesome. Please keep them coming. The next question that we have from an audience member is, did you ever have to date/be with someone you didn't want to be with because you felt pressure because you were told to?
I'll answer quickly, no.
I mean, I feel like as a trans woman, you're often kind of pressured, like, well, this is the best I'm gonna get. This guy at least doesn't like talk bad about me, at least doesn't berate me. So I think for women, I think it might be more common. For trans women, it might be more common that we do sometimes just like settle for something that's for someone that isn't the best for us. And for whoever asked that question, baby, like they're not worth your light. They're not worth your energy. Like, I know it's sometimes scary to leave somebody behind who you feel is the best you can get, but I promise you, there is so much better out there. And honestly, there's so much better in you than what anyone can offer you.
Thank you. Reina, did you want to answer this question too?
I am an abstinent, asexual trans woman. It's been about 7 years. My journey with closeted men and repression has me, just, kind of loving Reina Ortiz the way that she deserves to be loved and doing all the things that I feel are needed for me. Yeah, my journey for men, I wish them well. I wish them self-love and understanding, and I hope that these systems allow them to love the way that they deserve to be loved and love, yeah, repression. Repression is a terrible thing, and men suffer it very, very deeply. And a lot of times women are on the losing end of it. And then when you talk about trans women, it is a terrible burden that we have. So I kind of had the space and allowed myself to pull back from those relationships, and the power to say no is something that a lot of trans women don't have the luxury of, so love yourself, boots, find yourself, give yourself the love, and when you're there, the energy will give you that in return.
Thank you. That's such a powerful message. Thank you, everyone. There's another question from an audience member. It's, how can people and organizations in Cicero support queer and trans-led organizing? So going back to our topic on policy changes, but with a specific focus on organizations.
I'll just say that what even like Cicero Independiente is doing today is a big thing. It's a big step. And I know like all the work that you all are doing, I want to applaud that. Even Jorge, the work that you've done at Unity and just the work that you're doing is like, all of that is super important for like continuing to create, access and resources for LGBT people in Cicero. And so I just want to uplift that work is happening and that people are doing that work. And this is part of that work, and that that's one way I think it's just to support organizations like Cicero Independiente, who are trying to really move this work along. Yeah.
There's also the Rizoma Collective, which is really trying to get more progressive like representation in governments in Cicero and Berwyn. And so I think that's also supporting that, right? This kind of politics isn't the end all be all. Politics is not going to save us. It's not going to like that structure was not meant for us, right? And so it's like that, but it's still an important component because it's essentially harm reduction. It's so much easier to enact change and create spaces that are safer when you have a much more friendlier, administration. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the end all be all. But yeah, just Summa Collective, I think is like someone that's like doing a lot of good work. And but of course, Jorge, thank you for the work that you're doing. I mean, transforming unity and transforming, Morton high schools. I think it's also something that's very, very important. And I think, honestly, the young people are the ones who are making this transformation happen. All us old queens are just here to like really support. I'm like, at this point, I'm tired. You go ahead and do it. I'll gladly like support in the background and like uplift as best I can. That's kind of where I am at this point in my life.
You're gonna make me cry. We have one more question from the chat. This one is about suggestions on how to talk to our parents / elders about the LGBTQ plus community and issues that affect us. Do you folks have any recommendations or suggestions for our audience members on how to have those at times difficult conversations?
Speak your truth. That's it. Like what they say, even if your voice quivers, you gotta speak your truth, and you have to talk. And what is allyship? What is, dismantling transphobia and homophobia, are having those uncomfortable conversations, telling abuelo, like, you can't say that word no more. That's ugly. You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing about racism. When you see racism in Latino communities, you stop it. That's not the word to use, so it's having those conversations and know that the basis of it is about love and acceptance. I don't know what the outcome will come or be, but at least it's good to try and have those conversations, because at the end of it, it's about love. It's about love and acceptance.
I think it's like,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say something real quick, because I think the conversation around LGBTQ communities, it's like outside of it. Like, I think we need, as a community, as a people, we always say this in our workshops, like, feedback is a gift. Like, really being able to interrupt and give feedback is something that oftentimes our community is not very good at. Like, giving feedback to our parents would get us a guamazo, like would get us the chancleta. It's like that they didn't like it, but if we start changing around, like, no, I want you to be better, I want me to be better, and I want you to tell me this feedback, then it becomes easier to have these very difficult conversations. Because then, like Reina says, you can say, like, hey, abuelo, like, we can't do that. And then because you've already created this culture in your home where feedback is welcome, then abuelo's probably gonna be like, oh, so what's the word now? And it's like, it's just, I think it's beyond just having conversations around LGBTQ issues, but in general, our community really, really needs to be able to just have honest conversations and not be so defensive. Because, like, honestly, I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I'm not perfect. I get defensive. It's easy for us to get defensive. It's just kind of, our egos are so fragile, that anytime somebody pushes back, we feel like it's a threat to ourselves. And so if we start opening ourselves up to having honest communication and accepting feedback, then I think it becomes so much easier to have those conversations, like Reina says, racism, LGBT, like, queerphobia, homophobia, transphobia, etc.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider when having conversations with family members as a queer trans person is thinking about having a support system to have those conversations, because they're, ongoing, it's not just one conversation. It's not one coming out story, like your whole life, you're going to encounter different experiences that are going to trigger those conversations about feeling accepted and included in a family where you're the only queer or trans person. So I would say having a support system is important because it's ongoing. And then I think the other piece is, like, what tools can we give people who are not queer and trans, to have those conversations. I think when I look back at my own personal experience, and no one ever stopped to say, there was just immediate rejection, So I would say to people who are trying to be allies, it's just listening and asking, like, what can I do to support you? What can I do to make your environment safe? What questions do you have about being queer and trans? Like, literally, like, we don't even know, at a young age what it means to be queer and trans. And so we're trying to figure it out. So if my parents had said, like, hey, I'm going to go to the library for you, and I'm going to get information, and I'm going to like help you, and I'm going to like navigate this with you and answer any questions you might have about your own gender and sexuality, like, that would have been super helpful, like, to have an ally or a parent or a guardian or someone older that could help me navigate that, what would have made the world of a difference. So I would say for allies, like, to educate yourself and to provide that space, to open up that space of like, what do you need? Don't assume that we even know what the hell is going on, because I think we're all just trying to figure it out, especially at a young age, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have one more question directed to Reina. Someone asked about your experience being prom queen. Can you speak a little bit more about that for our wonderful audience?
I'm just trying to be sensitive because my computer's on a mess. But for me, I didn't know the impact, to be honest. I was just living. I was just celebrating myself as an individual. And I had battled my way through Cicero. And when I always say, like, when I got the crown, it was my reward. It was my reward to staying true to myself. It was my reward for advocating for myself. It was a testimony to me as a gender variant person, that if you fight hard for it, you will get the crown, and it set the tone. It's probably one of my proudest moments, and the ripple effect of it, when I got into the gay scene in 1999 and 19, how people already knew, like, oh, you're the one who won prom queen. And I'm just like, wow, it really traveled, and it was just it's a testimony to my youth, to trans youth, to LGBT youth, to love yourself, stay true to yourself, and you will get the crown, Thank you all. It's beautiful.
Thank you, everyone, to our panel. And I want to end by asking if any of our panelists have anything else they would like to add, any concluding words. You are all amazing champions. Did we lose someone else?
I'm gonna just move this out of.
Okay. But please, I would love to hear if you have anything you would like to say before we say goodbye.
Just thank you, Jorge, for facilitating and for your thoughtful questions, and to Cicero Independiente for hosting us. That's what I have to say. And thank you to Karari and Reina for all of your work.
Ditto.
Yeah, the same. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the queer youth that are still, laying the foundation and fighting for liberation of our community. It's just very beautiful to see. And so thank you all for having me.
Thank you. I know I speak on behalf of all the organizers. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, audience members. And I will pass it to Aina for some concluding thoughts.
I think you can see the screen now. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing, for being so open, so honest. I learned so much today too about our own history in Cicero. Just wanna share, we'll share these slides in the comments on Zoom and on Facebook. The work is not over. We heard a lot of great history, and there's history in the making right now. If you wanna support some queer and trans-led organizations, they are linked in the slideshow, and you can also see them here. You can also learn about all the amazing organizing that is happening in Cicero by following the links here. I just posted a few, but if you wanna hear, for example, example about how some like badass organizers are demanding that, you know, the town spend resources in supporting our community and caring for our community, you can listen to a podcast that we released, and it's linked here. You can, you know, visit a trans-owned beauty salon in Cicero that also participates in HIV STD testing, and you can read about amazing queer writers who, you know, are sharing their stories. Yes, and the slideshow also includes a few more images of the panelists that we heard from today. And Cicero Independiente right now is accepting applications for reporting fellowship, so those are linked as well. Thank you so much to everybody. Muchas gracias. And I think we're gonna get off the live now.
So thank you once more again to everyone. Thank you, Cicero Independiente, for being able to collaborate with the CCC and bring you this event. Thank you so much for all the panelists. Amazing stories, amazing information. I have one last favor to ask all of you. I did put a survey in the chat box. I know surveys are horrible, but we really want to know what you thought about today's presentation. We want to know how we can improve. We want to know what other education we can provide to our community. So please take the time to go ahead and fill that out for us. We will put that also in the Facebook Live comments. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a beautiful night. Thank you all.